from Secrets of the Citadel.
So I want to start off with a question. What is Ragnarok? And me and Gemma have had this conversation privately and both on our podcast, and we literally think it's a battle of ice and fire, also a song of ice and fire. And in Norse mythology, there's these poetic Eddas that basically describe most of the events of what's happening in a song of ice and fire. And we really just got captivated by the subject of the gods and the giants, and basically this cleansing of the earth and then rebirth of the world. And that essentially is what we think is happening in Westeros. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Gemma, start us off with what do you think Ragnarok is?
Well, before we get into that, I'd just like to clarify. A lot of you have probably seen Thor Ragnarok, which is awesome. Absolutely awesome. And while the original mythology of Ragnarok is not what Thor Ragnarok is, there are certainly elements within there that obviously Marvel have cherry-picked, like Surtr and his sword, and the fact that there was a prophecy called Ragnarok in the first place. So even if you're not massively familiar with the actual mythology itself, you can kind of pick from Thor Ragnarok as well. So we can kind of mix all of these and we'll have this Marvel, Game of Thrones, Norse mythology kind of vibe going on. But yeah, essentially, we started looking at the Ragnarok mythos, didn't we? And it was uncanny. And we're like, wow, this Bifrost bridge that separates the lands of ice and the lands of fire, and that sounds familiar. And the deeper we got into this, the more and more it was just everything, the character parallels, everything. No matter how deep we go into it, we only find more parallels. It's very clear that George R.R. Martin is exceptionally familiar with this myth, and has clearly. It's not like for like. There's no like for likes. George doesn't do that.
Martin never does one for ones.
No. But you can certainly pick a character, one of the gods, and then one of the characters from the Song of Ice and Fire, and do that direct comparison. Melisandre, for obvious reasons, features heavily in that comparison, doesn't she?
Hell.
Yeah.
I think I want to start us off with Fimbulvinter and the Long Night. So in Westeros, obviously we can see that dragons cause destruction, but really what's coming and what's been building for the majority of the Song of Ice and Fire throughout the books, and now we're seeing that through the TV show. Obviously we saw the Night King get a dragon and take down the wall, and now we know that there's actually going to be a battle of ice and fire. Well, we're assuming there is. I mean, Daenerys and her army have dragons, and there's Jon Snow, but Fimbulvinter literally means great and long terrible winter. And that's what's happening in Ragnarok,
yeah.
as these forces of ice and fire clash. And so when we were doing our research, we're like, well, you got the Long Night in A Song of Ice and Fire. So is this something that George was pulling from the mythos in Norse mythology and kind of implanting and overlaying it in The Song of Ice and Fire, and kind of, towards... That's where we're going. There's going to be this long night, and we're going to have these frost giants, the White Walkers, and then they're going to have to battle it out, and essentially there's going to be someone standing at the end, but we don't know who. So that's kind of what's really interesting. Gemma, there isn't just the Fimbulvinter. There's Muspelheim, there's Niflheim. We talked a little bit about the lands of always winter in A Song of Ice and Fire. We haven't really explored that. Obviously, we see the map is not charted like the other parts of the map in Westeros and Essos and Ahai, which is very much like Muspelheim. But Gemma, you want to talk a little bit about those two places?
Yeah, Muspelheim is basically the fire land, and Niflheim is north of the wall, the Iceland, and they're separated by the Bifrost Bridge. And again, if you're not hugely familiar with the Norse mythology, we've got Thor Ragnarok, we've got all the Thors, there's the Rainbow Bridge, and it's a Bifrost Bridge. So like I said before, that the parallels between Westeros, north of the wall, and the actual wall. I mean, we looked, yesterday we did a panel and we were talking about Hadrian's wall. This is not the only influence for the wall. There's at least 5 that I can think of off the top of my head, just for that one thing. But yeah, I've got a few quotes here from Ragnarok, and you can lay this directly onto the Song of Ice and Fire. So in the lands of Niflheim there is located the eldest of 3 wells, which is called Hervolgeimer, bubbling, boiling spring, protected by the huge dragon called Nighug. So if we lay this directly onto the Song of Ice and Fire, this is suggestive of an ice dragon. This is what we're doing. We're looking at these parallels and going, this is a like for like, this is similar, this character fits with this character. And in that case, where can we look in the future to get clues for where this story is going? And in Ragnarok, there is very much the suggestion of an ice dragon, and I know there's been big debates. Not going to happen. We're not going to see an ice dragon. You know, obviously George R.R. Martin wrote the ice dragon, and he said, no, this is not. It's a similar world. It's not the same. It's not like canon. It's a really lovely book. If you've not read it, actually, you really should. It's really good.
The female character is
yeah.
Oh, she's awesome.
And it's super short. So you could just read it in one sitting. It's really good. But yeah, it feels to me like this story is kind of set in ancient Westeros, doesn't it? Maybe before Winterfell, before the Wall. But this is what we're doing. We're kind of looking towards the future. Can we make predictions for the future based on this Ragnarok, in the instance that up to this point we have so many uncanny similarities, don't we?
So I think we're gonna segue into Angerboda and Loki and their 4 monstrous children. So Angerboda is a frost giantess, and Loki. Some of you, I mean, we see him in Thor, but we see him in many other cultures as the deceiver and the trickster. And what happens is they mate, and they have Fenrir, who is a great wolf. Mm-hmm. They have also Jormungandr, who is the serpent that encircles the world. And then we have the other 2, Gemma. Hela, or also known as Hela.
Hela, yeah. Who we think, well, you say Melisandre. I like Melisandre. She's the obvious fit, but I also think there's elements of Arya in Hell.
Goddess of Death.
Surtr, who is Jon Snow / Stannis. He's known as the Black Surtr, which, you know, watches on the wall.
He gets his sword from the Bifrost Bridge. He literally pulls it out, and it's a lot like the Azor Ahai myth with Lightbringer, which is very interesting.
It's not a lot like. It's the exact same thing, pretty much. He's wielding a flaming sword, and he's going to bring about
Ragnarok. He's going to cleanse the earth.
The cleansing.
And the Night's Watch gathers. We are the sword in the darkness. So these parallels are pretty interesting. Jormungandr is definitely Daenerys. We agree on that, because her journey is very circular. We have the Ouroboros symbol, for those of you who know, the infinity symbol, but on a smaller scale, it's also a circle, 2 circles.
Can I swing back round to Surtr being Jon Snow?
Ooh, my favorite.
So Surtr literally wields a fiery sword, and we did the Azor Ahai, the Warrior of Light panel, a couple of days ago. It feels a lot longer than that, actually.
It goes by really fast.
Okay. And we discussed, obviously, that Jon Snow is a major contender if there is an actual human version of Azor Ahai. I think we kind of concluded that it's more of a metaphor, but by the by. So we've got this Surtr, and if you've seen Thor Ragnarok, it's the big guy with the flaming sword that Thor kind of defeats at the beginning and then brings back at the end. So you kind of think, well, yeah, Jon's a good guy, isn't he? You know, he's Surtr's the destroyer. So why are we assuming parallels here? Well, you know, we've got the Azor Ahai wielding the Lightbringer thing, but you've got these textual hints in the Song of Ice and Fire, which then, so it's like Ragnarok comes into a Song of Ice and Fire, but it goes back. Jon was armoured in black ice, but his blade burned red in his fist. That is the very image of Surtr. It's almost word for word.
I got giddy when we did that one in research. I'm like, ooh, I think we found something.
But Surtr brings down the Bifrost Bridge. So you're thinking, does that mean Jon's going to bring down the wall? Now, obviously in the show, we've seen how that's occurred. I think we all agree that the show and the books have kind of their branches. I'm being kind.
Uh-oh, we're going to get into some stitches here on the panel.
I had a birthday party last night in our room, and we spent 4 hours ripping season 7.
I was in the other room. Okay, I was in the other room. Thank goodness.
Good times. That's the kind of nerdy parties that we have.
Would it be better to say they're two related mythos off the same narrative source, kind of?
Oh, now we're going down the rabbit hole. Are we going to completely...
Or gratuitous fan fiction.
So back to Ragnarok. Everyone, behave yourselves.
I'll shut up.
But to kind of harping on Gemma, or you gotta finish that one. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, so you're looking at, okay, Jon Snow's not going to bring the wall down. That's surely not. That would make no sense. Jon's rage was such that he would have smashed it all in an instant and the world be damned. And you go, okay, so it's there. It's in the text. I mean, it's not necessarily a literal translation, but I do think there's a very good possibility that Jon will have an indirect hand in bringing the wall down in the books. It will probably not be something he's doing on purpose, but I think, and when you look at what happened in the show's interpretation of the wall coming down, that can fall at Jon's feet, because Jon went on that ridiculous white hunt beyond the wall.
And then Sandor threw the rock, and that was like the best moment of the whole thing.
The reason why the Night King in the show got Viserion in the first instance was because Dany had to go and save Jon on his ridiculous mission. And the reason why the Night King brought down the wall was because he had Viserion. So yeah, we can put that at Jon Snow's feet. We can bring it back to him, and we can say there is blame. It's not 100% him. It wasn't intentional. Of course, that wasn't what he wanted to do. He did tell Dolores, don't knock it down, but he didn't help.
Was that actual foreshadowing?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a throwaway. There's no throwaway line.
Smacked us over the head with the foreshadowing on that one. But yeah. So I think in the show there is an argument that he had an indirect hand in that, and I think we might see even more of an indirect hand. That doesn't make sense. But we might see more of a direct hand in the books. I think it's going to be something to do with the wildlings and him letting them through. But yeah, I think that's where the parallels lie, and I think that will be something Jon's going to have to live with, knowing that he indirectly contributed to the exact thing he was trying to stop.
Speaking of indirect, we talked about the four monstrous children of anger, Odin, and Loki. And what we're seeing is, through the gods, in human form, Bran, we think Bran is Fenrir, the great monstrous wolf who's chained to the earth. I mean, we see Bran get pushed out of a window, and then obviously he awakens his third eye and becomes the three-eyed raven, or the next blood raven. And then we see, obviously, Hela, Melisandre is, she presides over the dead, and she's kind of dead herself, which is really interesting. So indirectly, all of these characters, they think they're basically doing the work of the gods, and they're bringing about the Ragnarok, whether they like it or not, basically. So it's pretty interesting. But Gemma's going to go over kind of a list of all the giants and all the gods, and you can kind of give us some feedback about if you think these are great comparisons for these specific gods.
Can I just ask, before I do this, I mean, who is familiar with the Norse Ragnarok? We've got got a few kind of,
We can explain them a little bit as we do the comparative.
So obviously if I say Odin, that's a pretty obvious. We all know who Odin is. We've looked at Bloodraven and Bran, but I mean, symbolically, this is Robert Baratheon. Bloodraven because of Hugin and Muggin, his ravens, and that Odin has, and obviously the one-eye thing that Bloodraven's got going on. But then you've got the Warhammer, which is Thor. They all tie in.
And we also said earlier, like, no one for once.
Exactly.
Martin does split these up too. It's really interesting. He'll take like parts of Odin and kind of overlay them over 3 or 4 characters too, to kind of confuse you. But there's like, one that has a little bit more than the other. So
we looked at Heimdall again in Ragnarok, and Thor Ragnarok. There is Heimdall's in that. Samwell Tarly. Tyr, Jaime Lannister.
Tyr is the lawful god of war and justice.
Yes. The one I like, what my favourite is Freya. And with Walder Frey, which is hilarious because Freya is the phallic lord of virility.
And Walder Frey has how many children?
7. There are over 70 characters in this story that have the last name Frey, and I'm not including Walder Frey's bastards. I know a lot of you are aware I did my family tree that took me 3 weeks, my Song of Ice and Fire family tree with 800 characters on there, all tracing back to Aegon. I was cursing Walder Frey for about 4 days.
She emailed me and I'm like, I'm leaving you alone for the day. Don't talk to me.
And it's like, and the thing is, I use the software that I use goes, are you sure you want these 2 to have a child? Because the software's saying this can't be a thing. And just do it. Jaime and Cersei. That was complicated. But at least 70 characters, and they're all called Walder Frey. It's about 30 of them, girls and boys, Walder Frey. Different spelling. So that's a funny one. There's some more there. Would you like to read from my list?
Yeah, Brynhildr, who is tied to Jaime Lannister, who is Tyr. There's also Eden, who is Sansa Stark. We got Frigg, who is Cersei Lannister. Balder, this is an interesting one. Balder can be represented as a few different characters. Balder actually gets revived, but Joffrey and Jon Snow. Also, Rhaegar could be perceived as Balder as well. Vidar, Tommen Baratheon. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, like Surtr. I mean, I look at Surtr and I see Jon Snow, but you see Stannis because of the symbolism. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we're all in agreement that Stannis is the Azor Ahai red herring. Mm-hmm. Even the characters in the book know that. But when you connect that symbolism to Stannis, he's got the flaming red heart, and so there's so many characters, and like Loki, we're still, the jury's out on Loki, isn't it?
We've actually done we try to do 2 characters an episode for a podcast because it can get pretty crazy after people in the live chat are asking questions. We like to get back to them, but like talking about 2 characters, and then we always go off track too. But well, I mean, in the first one we did Fenrir and Tyr because we believe that Jaime Lannister and Bran are going to be kind of on opposite sides of Bran more enabling the Night King to do some nefarious things, and Jaime going in that more redemptive path.
Well, Fenrir ripped off Tyr's hand. There's so much in here that.
The actual symbolism of Tyr is he's got a burning red sword in his fist, and he has one hand. So I mean, Jaime Lannister, and they call them the Golden Hand, Axion Ondos. That literally translates to Lord of Light, which is very interesting. So tying in with Tyr, who is viewed as this beautiful golden warrior, like light is shining off him, and he's in the books it's also described as well. That's the look of a king.
Yes. It's Jon Snow, isn't it? That's what a king.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a long time since I've read the Norse mythology, but as I recall, Tyr voluntarily put his hand in Fenrir's mouth, so that they could restrain Fenrir.
Well, because Fenrir is getting so strong, they had to use Sleipnir, which is this mithril. It was like this, it's like silk-like, super strong substance. This metal that was indestructible. He was growing so large that he was going to shake the earth and literally crack it apart.
Right. But my point was that
but because they tied him there, but they deceived him to do that. So, but he was going to break out of it anyways because he was so powerful. So he volunteered to go have basically a discussion with him, and Fenrir didn't trust him because he'd already been deceived by the dwarves and whatnot. So like he got his arm bitten off. Right. So it's interesting because Jaime pushes Bran out the window, and then he loses his sword hand, and that's Jaime's always associated himself as a warrior. So that's kind of where that lies.
Okay. I was thinking about the voluntary, offering his hand up to, and almost as a sacrifice, versus Jaime, who was taken pretty involuntarily, but taking it back to Bran. I could maybe see that.
Yeah, and karma. Think of it that way.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Jaime losing his hand, while it was, as you correctly said, incredibly non-voluntary, it was of his own doing. And it started with him pushing Bran. That was the moment everything changed. I mean, it's arguable. People identify, we look for the catalyst, don't we? The inciting incident, and a lot of people say Jon Arryn's death, which actually happened before the story even started. So that's quite an incredible concept, that the inciting incident actually happened before it started. But for me, Bran being pushed was the inciting incident of the first book. And then Ned's death was the inciting incident for all the other characters to then branch off and then start their own arcs. But it was certainly, losing Jaime's hand was certainly triggered by that domino effect. Obviously, the War of the Five Kings, it all kicked off, basically.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But without Jaime pushing Bran out the window, he wouldn't have evolved into what he is now. So Bran was chained to the earth. He had always had these dreams about being a warrior and a knight. Like, Bran wanted to be a knight. He never got to do that, but now he's something that's so transcendent. He's like transcended into something that's far more powerful than...
Pretty creepy as well.
Yeah, actually very creepy. And like, he's spying on his sister and stuff. Like, come on, man.
And I assume you guys are going to go there, but if I remember correctly, Tyr was one of the few of the gods to survive Ragnarok, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, Hel also maybe survived. Hel is one of the only characters whose her fate was completely unknown. And this is why I like Arya as a comparison, because one of the big debates about Arya is what will be her ultimate fate. Will she die? Will she live? Will she run off and marry Gendry and live in Storm's End? Or will she go west of Westeros? All these possibilities. Will she die with that cold needle in her hand? All of this kind of stuff. And I think George R. R. Martin has purposely given us all these options to leave Arya's fate ambiguous. And I do wonder if we won't know.
A girl
what
has
her
many
fate
names.
Is. Yeah.
I could see, this is some probably show only, but I could see her becoming the new Lady Crane and Bravos, leaving Westeros, finding her own pack. We see the interaction with her and Nymeria. That's not me. Well, Arya's had many names, and she's an adventurer. She reminds me a lot of Nymeria and her 10,000 ships. Like, she was going on these amazing voyages. So but it's interesting though. Hel is someone completely different.
She is, yeah. But ultimately, she's the only one we just don't know. We don't know what happened to her. So, and it's kind of nice because you can make up your own mind then, and I think that might be where we go with Arya. Well,
it's interesting too, because like a lot of people talk about like what's west of Westeros, Arya sailing off and having that ambiguous ending. We're gonna get some of those. We're gonna get, we're not gonna get all the answers. This is George R. R. Martin we're talking about. So
especially not in the show. There is not enough time in 6 episodes to tie up all of those loose ends. I think we're going to have to just kind of suck it up a little bit.
Her book fate could be much more grim, I think. Yeah.
But I mean, the whole point of this, we can go on all day looking at these comparisons and going, this character's like this character and this storyline fits this storyline. But the whole point of this is to, like I said at the beginning, is to potentially make predictions and look forward. And I think the conception behind Ragnarok is that it's an Armageddon. It's the end of Asgard, the destruction, but it's not, is it? It's not an end, it's a beginning, it's a rebirth. And again, this is very much, and it's not just us, and it's certainly not just based on Ragnarok. Many people can see this story ending with a beginning.
Well, let's relate this to the Azor Ahai prophecy. We have Azor Ahai reborn, right? And we talked about how they're going through these transformational moments, and all these characters, where we saw them in the beginning and we see them now, they're completely different people, and that's where we're going in the story. These transformational moments, they're all going to have their Azor Ahai-like moments in Ragnarok, and people will be reborn in the end. They, will have the cripples, bastards, and broken things in the end that will, perhaps Tyrion or Davos will even write the Song of Ice and Fire, and then, that'll be, they'll be the children. Vidar's and his companion. They're the ones who kind of the dream of spring, so to speak. At the end, the world has been cleansed by ice and fire, and they're the ones who are there to kind of take over the mantle and build a new world. The wheel has been broken. That kind of sentiment. We don't really know who that might be. That's maybe baby Sam and Jon and Daenerys' child.
Yeah, talking about being beaten over the head with foreshadowing, I think it's clear that Dany's going to have a little Jon Aries.
Hashtag Jon Aries.
and that this is a popular theory, isn't it? That either Jon or Dany or potentially both could die at the end of this and then pass on in their child. Maybe Sam will have to raise like Ned did for Jon. Is this... Can you see that happening? Is this in the show at least?
Anybody?
Potentially, certainly.
Yeah. And then we've got
because it is a bittersweet ending. Bittersweet ending, right? We always talk about the bitter, Gemma, but there is going to be. Oh, shit! I can't stand her when she does that. Look, man. Or triggering me. But yeah, I think that we are going to have some sweet in the end. It's going to be sad.
There has to be a sacrifice.
There has to be a sacrifice. That sacrifice so that people can move on differently than before. Yeah, and that's kind of what Ragnarok is. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, this. I'm going to just read this from my notes because I've pretty much written this as it should be. Ragnarok was essentially, in a nutshell, the forces of ice and fire uniting as one to attack the world of gods and men, because the world was plagued by civil war, rampant immorality, patricide, fratricide, and disease. And when all is said and done, only the children of the gods shall remain. If this is equated then to the forces of ice and fire, then only the children of ice and fire shall remain in the Game of Thrones. Or at least that would be the intention of the White Walkers, if that makes sense. And the child of ice and fire is arguably Jon Snow, but if Dany and Jon have a baby, that's also a child of ice and fire. One
really interesting thing that happened last week, a little bit of a spoiler, not for the show, but George had his original outline. He had 5, maybe a 6th character that were going to be for sure going to survive the series. He came out and said those people aren't safe anymore. So there's a possibility where we get a Jon and Daenerys death in the end, because it's going to be hard to beat
which
the Night
I've
King.
been saying for ages.
Yeah. She's so sassy. I don't know how we're friends. Sir, you had your hand up, and we'll get to you as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's cogent to the whole thing.
It's okay. You're handsome. I'll allow it. I made you feel uncomfortable. Sorry.
Admittedly, my understanding of the Ragnarok myth is imperfect. When we say only the children of gods will survive, are there not 2 human beings that hide in the branch or trunk of Yggdrasil?
They inherit the new world, essentially.
Yeah.
But they survive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I thought that was worth it.
It's interesting because the book was originally named
Baby Sam.
Baby Sam and Little Jon Aries.
Baby Jon Aries. Lyanna.
The last book was originally named A Time for Wolves. And there's a poetic Edda, and has a wind age, a wolf age. Basically, it talks about how there's going to be the sundering of the earth, and it says a wind age, and then a wolf age, and then an ice age. And it talks about all the different ages. And the titles of the books are literally adapted from this poetic Edda. So George is giving us these hints from this Norse mythology and kind of saying, hey, look at the title of the books. The Winds of Winter. Well, we're going to have the Battle of the Bastards. We're going to obviously perhaps have The wall falling down, that might be a big one. And then you have the dream for spring. Why did he change it from a time for wolves to a dream for spring?
Yeah.
Does that mean the dream for spring, we're getting that Vidar and his companion? We're going to get, Yeah, go ahead, Casey.
Well, no, I was just going to say what you just said.
Okay. Sir, you had a question?
Yeah, you said the likelihood of Jon and Dany dying in the end is pretty highly likely, but if Daenerys was to have her child first, that's obviously not going to happen until after the White Walkers are dealt with. So I feel like if they end the series with, taking out the White Walkers, Dany getting the throne, all that optimistic crap, and then
What's your name, sir?
Blake.
Blake, I like you. You're good.
I'm assuming the only really way to do it without being a complete cop-out is her dying in childbirth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, can I throw this on you guys? This is a little bit of tinfoil. This is kind of show only. We got to visually see what happened at the Tower of Joy. And I think that, wouldn't it be ironic if Jon had to experience the same thing that Ned did?
Yeah.
You know how tragic that would be? Ned sacrificed he had to lie to his wife and do all of that. But if Jon had to experience the same thing, and it all goes back to what Benjen said as well. You don't know what you'd be missing. Jon was ready to give everything up to protect the realms of men. And also Maester Aemon, duty is the death of love, love is the death of duty. How does he choose? It's almost impossible.
And
right?
this, again, it's this, I said in 6 episodes we're not going to tie up all those loose ends, but we are going to see circles being completed. We were talking about Bran and Jaime earlier on, that inciting incident of Bran being pushed. I can't wait to see them meet each other again. That's going to be like one awkward conversation, right?
Is Bran going to be like, thank you, I got my powers,
How's that going to go down,
Yeah, they've both grown so much, except for Bran's still kind of creepy.
Have you guys looked into the Robert Frost poem, Fire and Ice?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very similar to the poet Edda's, actually.
It's about Ragnarok.
Yeah.
He uses fire and ice symbolically as hate and desire.
Yeah.
And we all know that Song of Ice and Fire is both about human heart in conflict with itself, but also supernatural battles. So I think that he's telling the Robert Frost hate and desire Ragnarok and the actual supernatural apocalypse Ragnarok at the same time.
Free will. So,
the conclusion of that poem is essentially, it really doesn't matter either way because it will be destroyed by fire or ice. They're both destructive forces, and it's a really beautiful poem, actually. Lucifer means Lightbringer's in the house, by the way.
I really like what he was just saying.
Yeah.
Actually. I really think that if you look at the others, they feel like hate. And if you look at the Targaryens, they fit more with desire, I would say.
fire consumes.
We're a panel member down if you want.
Where is George?
He's been otherwise engaged, unfortunately. You can come and be judged.
You want to come up?
Come and be judged.
Lucifer means Lightbringer, everyone. A guest on our panel. Awesome. He was nice enough to have him on the Azor Ahai panel the other day. Which
I love your guys' podcast.
I'm feeling kind of warm on now. Ooh.
I knew you.
Elodie, I'm sorry. I'm stealing David from you.
That's very timely because I was going to bring up the panel the other day about the nature cycle that you headed and orchestrated. It's beautifully orchestrated.
Oh, thank you.
And I sat there because I watched the Ragnarok podcasts and very impressed. And I sat there listening to you and your co-panelists talking about the nature cycle. And if I remember correctly, it was the Green Man, essentially, the seasons, life and death. And I was thinking how closely, of course you'd expect in primitive societies, you'd expect the mythological structure to reflect nature. But I was thinking in terms of the sort of things you all have been talking about, Fenrir and so forth and so on. And by the way, I do think Bran's going to be sacrificed. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, Ragnarok fits right into that context, doesn't it? It's the, was it Fimble winter? Is that how you say it?
Fimble winter, yeah.
So it's basically a long night, winter, and then of course the survivors, where they hide in a tree, right? And they pop out when it's over. In the ash tree,
yeah.
Yggdrasil.
So we've got the sort of the rebirth afterwards, and it's coming from a tree. So you see mankind's origins in nature being expressed. So yeah, Ragnarok fits absolutely in the context of the nature cycle mythology.
But so many things do, and this is what we talked about yesterday, wasn't it? I mean, I didn't get my death metal references in. I was a bit upset about that. I
This
just wanted
was a
to say
severe
how
oversight.
I have to listen to death metal all the time with her, and it's kind of starting to piss me off.
really wanted to
she woke
say-
me up to DMX and Ozzy Osbourne the other day. It wasn't Megadeth. It was 6 in the morning. It was really
got him
awful.
out of bed. Tenacious D as well.
Oh, yeah. Pick of Destiny.
This panel is going to go sideways quick.
Yeah, we're already sinking.
It's just D, baby.
We've Ragnarok the panel. We're out. Gemma?
Well,
Yeah.
So Gemma, what you're saying is like these cycles are ever present, and so everybody makes different nature cycle myths. What George is really good at is having an eye on where they sort of overlap, and I can combine Ragnarok with the Green Man myth by doing this, and he loves doing that. I mean, I've caught him combining Cernunnos with Lovecraft ideas, because there's a Lovecraft race of beings called the Old Ones, but Cernunnos is called the Old One, and so there's some horned people in Lovecraft, and so he's taken those and Cernunnos and done a little thing. So he does that anytime he can. It's like just mashups, literature mashups.
Yggdrasil and the Weirwood trees?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The old gods?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's other sacred trees that occasionally pop in, but they're like 80% Yggdrasil for sure. I mean, we got a guy crucified on the tree. He's just downstairs instead of upstairs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and when we looked at Loki specifically, there was a lot of characters that we could attribute to Loki, because we really wanted Bloodraven for Odin, because you've got him sat there with his one eye and he's got his ravens around him, and this is Odin, right? And then we're kind of looking at Loki and going, but Loki's the trickster, and then in the relationships with the other characters in Ragnarok and the things that, especially Fenrir, and we're going, well, Bloodraven's kind of Loki too.
Fenrir got tricked, by the way, remember that.
Yeah.
And Bran was getting taught by the Three-Eyed Raven, and we remember that the Children of the Forest were the ones to make the White Walkers
Right.
and the Night King. So that's something that we don't have in the history books for all intents and purposes. We don't know a lot of that. So what are his actual intentions with Bran? Because I think that when it comes down to it,
Big question.
Does he care about the Iron Throne? Probably not. I think he probably cares more about the greater cycle.
Yeah,
the
so I am on Team Bloodraven. I think Bloodraven generally has the
That
right
needs to be a
intentions.
t-shirt.
But I totally understand people that think Bloodraven's evil. I mean,
We always fall back to that default argument, don't
he's
we?
certainly willing to do awful things to achieve the ends that he thinks are right. So it's just a matter of how far that down the road.
He's trying to achieve what we're seeing is an imbalance between man and nature, essentially. Martin's trying to teach us that lesson that is actually really happening in our world right now. So
Yeah, that's what we were talking about on the nature cycle mythology, how the long night it disrupts the nature cycle, obviously, because we're stuck on winter, but then you get stuck on night, so you don't get daytime, and then we're stuck on basically death, because the living dead are refusing to stay dead, and they're killing the living. And so it's basically a complete abomination, the long night.
Yeah, and
in every sense.
that's why Ragnarok had to be brought about, because the land was out of balance.
Right.
And Ragnarok is there to bring balance, so that is exactly the same thing.
Which
isn't it?
ties into that sort of Daenerys cleansing fire idea that we've been kicking around a little bit. Like it's destruction, but it'll bring balance. Yeah.
We've got Lysa Tully.
So you're talking about different interpretations of who Loki could be. What
Yeah.
about Littlefinger? Because he's
Yeah.
a trickster.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Martin doesn't
Definitely.
do one for once, yeah.
He's the mockingbird.
What is it we?
Masquerades as other birds. So
I think Littlefinger and Bears combined, because they're the great manipulators
Certainly.
of the world as a whole.
Certainly.
Yeah. I mean, Littlefinger. Loki is a shapeshifter. It takes the form of birds and fish and insects and even mist. So, you can attribute those to all of those characters.
Littlefinger's sigil is a bird.
Is a mockingbird.
Look at Arya's changing identities even before she got to know about faces and things like that.
Yeah.
She's definitely a trickster at times.
Yeah.
So there's a really good write-up that my friend Sweet Sunray did about Arya as a Valkyrie figure. And if you guys haven't read that, you would die for it. I mean,
haven't.
It is awesome. And Sweet Sunray is like, she might be like another level beyond me as far as like mythology nerding out on this stuff. I mean, she's really learned it.
Historical preference?
Yeah, so...
Where would we see that? I mean, I'd love to read. I've seen a
she's
reference.
you can just put in Arya Valkyrie Sweet Sunray and you'll find it. It's on Westeros.org and it's also on her blog, which is called
Great.
I think Sweet Sunrise.
I'm going to be distracted all day reading this now. How can I get to my next panel?
So let me ask you, Gemma. You talked about how Bloodraven has a touch of Loki and Odin.
Yes.
And they're both manipulators.
They are. Yeah.
Okay, but Odin is generally trying to steer things towards a more organized course, whereas Loki's known for causing chaos, right? And you guys, admittedly, know more Norse than I do. So how are we seeing, like, Bloodraven's a manipulator, Peter Baelish is a manipulator, but Baelish is talking about openly embracing chaos,
Yes.
whereas Bloodraven seems to be steering things toward an end. So how do you address that
But what
chaos
ends?
element of Loki? Like, where do you see that?
Well, this is again. We say that George doesn't do one for ones, but and we're trying to kind of peel this apart and say, well, if we can say Bloodraven is Odin, for example, then we can make predictions about Bloodraven's intentions. But when we're then faced with, but Bloodraven could also be Loki, then we don't. Then we're back to square one again as far as his intentions go, because, like you said, they're two very different sides of that same coin. They're both tricksters, they're both master manipulators, but they both have very different agendas. So the jury's still out on Bloodraven. I mean, we always come back to, if in doubt, blame Bloodraven, don't we? Because it's everything, like literally everything is his fault.
Yeah, my eyes glaze over as soon as I'm like, Bloodraven.
Well, we got to remember that the gods are working through men, and that's how we're seeing Ragnarok. The people like Jon Snow and Melisandre, whether they know it indirectly or they know it, it's happening.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the relationship between Theon and the Weirwoods and where that's going, because it seems like due to all his trauma, he's starting to be able to hear, the voices from the
voice of Theon Greyjoy is
right.
coming because he's still Reek, and we get the Ghost of Winterfell chapter, which is probably in my top 5 favorites.
Oh yeah,
it's just
a beautiful chapter.
I'm not going to do anything today but read. I think now I've changed my mind. I'm going to go read that chapter.
Bookshelf, congratulations on waking up this morning. I heard a couple stories, saw a couple pictures.
Are you okay?
Yeah, did Matt?
Yeah, we saw it.
I'm curious. I mean, it seems like
I'm awake enough to have a question.
Yeah.
How do you see Euron fitting into this? In the book, he definitely has more of.
Uh-oh, Gemma's about to drop some nuclear tinfoil on us.
More of the action, all that, the magic. Whereas in the show, he's just more of like an asshole pirate. But how do you see him fitting in?
There are elements. I mean, there's it's one of the giants called Hiram, which can be connected to House Greyjoy in general. But I think as far as the Greyjoys go, George R. R. Martin went heavy H.P. Lovecraft with all the. So remember when I said earlier on about my family tree, House Greyjoy is not on it. That we cannot connect House Greyjoy. They are so separated from the rest of this world, physically and literally. Yeah, it's that whole deep ones and the squishers.
So I've been calling Euron evil pirate Odin on bad acid for a while now. That's what I call him.
But I think this is. I don't know if anybody's read the sample chapters. Yeah, most of you probably have. I won't. No spoilers, obviously. But there is a chapter called The Forsaken, and
it's very evil pirate.
That one makes
on
me
bad acid.
wait. That one makes me moist.
It's spectacular. It's absolutely spectacular, but it's quite.
You've covered the Forsaken,
shocking.
and so do we have. So we've both covered the Forsaken.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, it's quite surprising though, isn't it? It's like, is this gothic horror now? It seems, and I think that again is telling that Greyjoy is almost a separate entity. So maybe not so much for Ragnarok.
And it's interesting, final point, and then we'll get to you. It's like, we talked about indirectly the gods are working through men. Euron's trying to become a god.
Oh, very much so.
Right? Yeah,
and he's got all the, spoiler, he's got the priests on the prow of his ship. It's like,
He's got a speech in The Forsaken that's the ultimate, like, I am your new god speech, and it's awesome.
It's pretty crazy.
I was just curious, so this is a very big discussion, obviously, but the characters that we attribute as the heroes of the story, the Jonathans, you guys are equating them or making them analogous to the villains of Ragnarok, Jormungandr, Surtr, so forth, right?
Yeah, like we said, Jormungandr, there's Daenerys and Hel. Yeah,
exactly. And Jormungandr kills and is killed by Thor in the end, if I remember correctly. Yeah. But that said, does that imply that the Night's King is the site of the gods, perhaps? Does that also imply that the Whites, the army of the dead, is analogous to the warriors of Valhalla?
Very interesting. I mean, because Hel presides over them too. And the Melisandre Blue figurine, do we want to even get into that? Because we discussed that on the podcast.
Is everyone familiar with the Melisandre Blue collector's figurine that George R.R. Martin commissioned? There's some nods, there's some shaking of heads. Basically, George R.R. Martin is a collector of, as we probably all are, of figurines, and he's got the whole Song of Ice and Fire collection, and he specifically asked for Melisandre to be blue and frost and ice, and yeah, we touched upon this. Stannis and Melisandre, their story is a direct parallel to the 13th Commander of the Night's Watch and the Night Queen and all of that. But the fandom just went insane when we saw this figure. What does this mean? Is this just a fun thing that he wanted, or can we read into this and produce?
He wanted to drive us insane.
It did drive us absolutely.
Well, to his question, I've thought about this a little bit in the context of the Stark Dead, because there's all those clues about the Kings of Winter rising. It's like, well, maybe we'll have, like Aragorn's army of the dead on the good side. But what you're talking about is sort of getting at that same topic from a slightly different angle. It's like, well, what about the White's army of the dead? George just loves inverting things. Like, Joe Magician was talking about how the Valyrians are basically like Sauron incarnate, but then our first Valyrian is Dany, who we're supposed to root for. So,
you know what's interesting is that, can I ask everyone a question in this room? If you had dragon glass in your chest and you were turned into an ice being for 8,000 years, because essentially the people that are trying to get to Valhalla are trying to have glory, and Ragnarok, they're going to go into battle and a lot of people are going to die. So are they going to achieve their glory? Is that what they want? So that's pretty interesting to think if maybe that's what the White Walker, they're trying to mutually assured destruction, essentially. They're trying to, who would want to live for 8,000 years like that? I don't know, I would want to.
That's why I was talking about hate. Like, the gray area with White Walkers, I feel like, will come into what happened to them. Somebody wronged them right at the beginning. Like, who was that guy tied to the tree? Why was he tied there? What did he do? Was he an innocent victim, or was he meddling with magic? Was he a green seer? Yeah, did he have a family? Yeah, we don't know. I hope the show goes into that, but we'll see.
George said that Lady Stoneheart is a fire wife.
He said Beric Dondarrion.
Yeah, Lady Stoneheart.
Yeah, because
yeah. So if Jon comes back, he could also be a fire wife and be Surtr. If Melisandre brings him back, she could possibly lose her power, die, go to the others.
Yeah.
Become that
the Night's Queen.
Yeah, sort of. If she gives her fire to Jon, then maybe she does the flip.
Yeah.
And plus, all the others' icy languages of burning ice. Their eyes burn like cold stars, and nothing burns like the cold. So it's cold, but it's like this burning cold. So it kind of makes you think that maybe there's a flip, because we have frozen fire too, right? So
if we do see a literal reincarnation of the Night's Queen, I don't think we will.
There's only one candidate, really.
If we did, it would have to be Melisandre. Figurines aside.
I guess I was thinking Dany, but...
Well, people have said Sansa because she's the Northern Queen. People have said Cersei because of that intake of breath for the trailers for season 7. Everyone went crazy for that.
At the end of Ragnarok, there's a big flood, like a Noah-esque flood that cleanses the earth. Well, there's a certain guy associated with the sea that wants to rule over the graves and charnel pits after the wars are over.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where you're at.
Yeah, I know not.
You know what else is
everybody's
good for
read it.
causing really big floods?
Melting ice.
Answer. Moon meteors. That's right.
Oh man, you make me laugh.
Every time somebody said moon meteors
Hey, you gave me a
last night, we had
microphone, brother.
to have a drink.
You gave me the mic.
By the way, does anyone prefer old Melisandre? Wow. Kidding. Sorry, I had to put that in there.
Some people.
I have been very clued in. I was trained a little bit in philosophy. I'm a literature major, and I love the Manichaean dichotomy.
Yeah.
And I think that we got a real hint at it, not just ice and fire and all the things everyone's thinking about it. I think that George is about duality.
Oh, yeah.
And we got a big hint at it last season when Jon told Theon, you are Stark and you are Greyjoy.
Yes.
And we're all sitting there going, oh boy, what is he going to find out
Yeah.
next year?
That was such a great scene.
It was a great scene. It resonated with me because I'm thinking, okay, Bran is the three-eyed raven and he's Bran. Arya is Arya Stark of Winterfell and she's no one. And we're getting, except maybe Sansa who has no magic powers, we're getting all kinds of dualities. And I think that boils down to the human heart
In conflict.
And specifically, it's the reconciliation of those dualities, like the reconciliation of Ice and Fire, the reconciliation of Theon as a Stark and a Greyjoy. Like he's got to come to terms with both.
And you have to live with it and
Yeah.
get it and forge ahead, or you are consumed by it.
Yes.
Well, it's 11:49. We want to thank all of you for coming today. Any final thoughts, panel?
Well, we're not done with Ragnarok. Basically, we're not even started with the Ragnarok. We've got a lot more planned for the podcast. So if you are a subscriber and we want to carry this on, we're going to be looking specifically at Yggdrasil next.
We haven't done. We're going to do Yggdrasil and Jormungand next. Actually, the circular nature of kind of like.
And you're going to talk about how Thor killing Jormungandr is the same as Robert killing Rhaegar of the Trident, right?
Yes.
Of course. Very much so. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. Thanks. Casually showing up.
The ringer. I just sort of troll around to see if there's an empty microphone.
You know what? Like I said, we
Yeah, I try to get my
down,
feel,
so
man.
that worked out nicely. Hello. Hype and love.
Hype and love. Hype and love.
Hype and love.
Hi, Hype and Love family. We're at Con of Thrones.
Hype and love. Our family here at Dallas. Con of Thrones. Can we get a hype and love? Hype and love.